They told you being open was the key. That vulnerability made you real. That emotions needed to be shared, poured out, spilled onto every table, every room, every person who would listen, or even pretend to. So you opened. You explained. You unraveled yourself in front of people who weren't ready to hold you, people who didn't respect your softness but fed off it. People who said, "I care," while slowly draining the very energy you were trying to protect. You thought being emotionally available made you kind, that your openness proved your value, that your constant explaining, constant messaging, constant transparency somehow made you lovable. But here's what they never said. When your emotional door is always open, anyone can walk in, anyone can leave a mess, and not everyone wipes their feet before they step on your spirit. Being emotionally open without discernment is not strength, it's exposure. And exposure without protection invites pain, not growth, not healing. Just repeated cycles of disappointment disguised as connection. You can be kind and still guarded. You can love deeply and still protect yourself fiercely. You can be emotionally intelligent without being emotionally accessible to everyone. That's not cold. That's wisdom. That's survival. That's the first step toward becoming untouchable, not by building walls, but by learning that not every emotion is meant to be shared. Not every wound needs an audience. Not every feeling needs to be spoken in the moment it's born. You learn to hold your emotional weather without broadcasting every storm. You learn to sit with your triggers without reacting like a puppet every time someone tugs a string. Because being emotionally available to the wrong people is like handing them the keys to your peace and watching them joyride your sanity. Every time you explain yourself to someone who doesn't care to understand, you fracture your own voice. Every time you overreact to something meant to provoke you, you train the world to know your weak points. And you stop being sovereign, you stop being rooted, you stop being free, so you start to pull back, not out of fear, but from clarity. You begin to realize that people don't need access to your feelings to validate them. You no longer look for mirrors in others. You become your own reflection. You stop telling stories just to make others feel comfortable with your silence. You stop shrinking your storms into soft breezes just to keep the peace, because sometimes keeping the peace costs you your power, and you're done paying that price. You're done offering your soul for discounts in relationships. You're done performing emotional availability just to be seen. You now understand your energy is a currency, and you will not spend it on people who don't invest back. That doesn't make you closed off, it makes you precise. You don't hate people. You just don't hand them the blueprint to dismantle you anymore. You move quietly, you process privately, you heal inwardly, not because you're hiding, but because you're mastering. Your emotions are no longer public property. They are sacred, they are sharp, and you hold them like a sword, not a wound. When people used to ask you how you feel, you'd spill, you'd explain, you'd try to make them see, but now you let your boundaries speak louder than your explanations ever could. If they can't feel your shift, your silence will teach them, because emotional availability is only power when it's directed with intention, when it's guarded by wisdom, when it's earned, not assumed. So now you move different, not detached, but deliberate. Not numb, but neutral. You learn to observe before you engage. You learn to feel without reacting. You learn that your emotions are real, but they don't run the show. You do. And that's the turning point. That's the start of becoming emotionally untouchable. When you stop leaking your peace. When you stop offering explanations just to maintain temporary connections. When you stop apologizing for feeling deeply, but no longer letting those feelings drown you. You start showing up as someone new, calmer, stronger, quieter, but heavier. Your presence weighs more now, because it's not scattered across the opinions of others. It's not dangling from someone else's validation. It's not reacting to every look, every message, every rejection. It's here, whole, rooted, and that terrifies people, because they were used to the version of you that bled on cue, that reacted immediately, that needed to be understood, accepted, liked. But that version of you is gone, buried beneath the ashes of your own rebirth. What stands now is something unshakable, someone who feels deeply but moves with discipline, someone who loves but doesn't leak, someone who speaks, but only when the words add weight, not noise. You are not emotionless. You are emotionally evolved. You are not distant. You are discerning. You don't shut people out. You just stop letting them in too fast, too easy, too deep. You don't owe anyone the inner map of your soul just because they asked nicely. That access is earned. And from now on, you are the gatekeeper of that access. That is how it begins. That is how you become untouchable, emotionally, energetically, entirely. They say you've changed, that you're distant, that you don't feel the same. And maybe they're right. Maybe you've finally pulled back the version of yourself that bled too easily, that responded too fast, that showed up too raw. Maybe now you've become something they don't recognize because they only knew the version of you that didn't know how to protect itself. The truth is, emotional detachment is misunderstood. They see it as coldness, but they don't realize it's control. It's not apathy, it's mastery. Because being emotionally untouchable doesn't mean you feel less. It means you react less. You're still human. You still feel everything. But you've trained yourself not to collapse every time something shakes you. You've mastered the pause. You've learned to breathe before speaking, to observe before responding, to distance before drowning. Detachment is not about caring less. It's about not letting every wave crash through your foundation. You're not building walls. You're building structure. You're choosing stillness instead of spiraling. You're learning to protect your peace like it's sacred because now you know it is. People think being emotionally strong means you don't cry, don't care, don't love. But emotional strength is something else entirely. It's the ability to love without losing yourself, to care without carrying, to connect without collapsing. And that's what detachment gives you, freedom. Not from people, but from the grip they once had on your emotions. Because when you were always available, always accessible, always reacting, you were never really free. You were a prisoner of every mood, every word, every slight shift in someone else's behavior. And you called it love. You called it loyalty. But it was dependency in disguise. It was your nervous system screaming for stability in people who couldn't even regulate themselves. And now, you've reclaimed that responsibility. Now, your safety doesn't live in their reactions. It lives in your regulation, in your breath, in your boundaries, in your silence. Emotional detachment is not absence, it's presence, sharpened. You don't disappear, you become deliberate. You don't ignore, you choose when and how to respond. You don't abandon your feelings. You learn how to sit with them without turning them into weapons or wounds. You watch your own mind like a guardian. You question your impulses. You choose your energy. Because you've learned, not every feeling needs a reaction. Not every urge needs expression. Not every emotion is a truth. It's just a wave. And you don't have to ride every wave just because it rises. That's the difference between being emotionally reactive and emotionally sovereign. One is chaos, the other is calm. And you've chosen calm. You've chosen power. You've chosen to stop handing people the remote control to your nervous system. You no longer panic when someone pulls away. You no longer chase closure from people who thrive on leaving doors open just to keep you spinning. You no longer base your worth on how quickly you're understood. Detachment means you stop trying to make people get you and you start getting yourself. And once you truly understand yourself, you stop begging the world to see you. Because you see you, you validate you, you ground you. There's a storm inside you, but it doesn't control you anymore. You hold the eye of it in your palm. And that's what people don't get. That's why they say you've changed. Because you don't break like you used to. You don't spill your heart in places that echo. You don't over-explain your soul to people who only listen to respond. You've become silent where you used to scream. You've become still where you used to run. And people feel that shift. They feel your restraint, your mystery, your distance. And it scares them. Because before they could pull your strings. Now you don't even flinch. That's not coldness. That's the work, the discipline, the rewiring of your nervous system from reactive to refined. The detachment that says, I can love you and still walk away. I can care and still say no. I can feel deeply and still remain unmoved by chaos. That's emotional evolution. That's not running away from feeling. That's rising above its control. Because now you're not just surviving emotions. You're leading them, guiding them, holding them in check like fire in the hands of someone who's been burned too many times to play carelessly again. You've trained your mind to stop reacting to shadows. You've trained your heart to stop bleeding for empty cups. You've trained your soul to stop proving its worth. And you've become something new. Untouchable, not because you can't feel, but because you no longer let feelings drive the vehicle. You don't react to every horn. You don't chase every car that passes. You stay on your road, calm, present, focused. And that's terrifying to those who only know how to connect through chaos, who only feel alive when they can push buttons and pull reactions. But you're not in that game anymore. You've unplugged your triggers. You've disarmed your need to be understood. You've chosen self-possession over people-pleasing. And now you don't just walk different. You exist different. Heavier, calmer, more still. Not because you've gone cold, but because you've gone deep. And nothing shallow can shake you now. There was a time when your silence felt like weakness, when you couldn't stand not being heard, when every misunderstood word, every unfair accusation, every raised voice pulled you into reaction. You'd explain, you'd argue, you'd defend yourself like your life depended on it. Because in your mind, it did. You thought if they didn't understand you, you'd lose something, their respect, their love, their approval. So you reacted, constantly, emotionally, desperately. But now you know better. Now you've learned. Silence is not absence. It's not retreat. It's not surrender. Silence is strategy, and strategy is power. Because silence makes people sit with themselves. It forces them to hear their own words echo back in the emptiness. It turns the spotlight around. And in that stillness, they start to question. Your silence speaks. It speaks louder than any defense, louder than any comeback, louder than any need to be right. Because silence doesn't just remove noise, it exposes it. When you stop reacting, people can no longer use your energy to validate their chaos. They can't throw their fire at you and expect you to burn. They have to watch it die in their own hands. And that's where the fear begins. That's why silence terrifies people. Because they no longer have access to the script. They can't predict your next line. They can't feed off your emotion. And suddenly the game feels different. Because you're no longer playing. You've become the observer, the mirror, the one who sees without showing, who hears without answering, who feels without flinching. And that level of control, it's rare, it's dangerous, it's magnetic. Silence is not void. It's volume turned inward. It's emotional precision. It's the quiet that says, I don't need to prove anything. I don't need to respond to everything. I don't need to be understood to know my truth. You realize that most people don't want understanding. They want dominance. They want the upper hand. They want to trigger you just enough to make themselves feel significant. And when you stop responding, when you stop engaging in the emotional tennis match, they lose their grip. Not just on you, but on their own identity. Because they defined themselves through your reactions. And now they're staring at silence. Your silence. The kind that burns. The kind that reveals. The kind that commands more attention than 1,000 words ever could. There's a reason the most dangerous people are quiet, not because they have nothing to say, but because they've mastered when to say nothing. They don't waste their breath convincing the blind to see or the deaf to hear. They conserve energy like a weapon, and they only unsheath it when the moment demands power, not proof. That's who you've become. You no longer argue your worth. You no longer explain your boundaries. You no longer let someone else's confusion become your emergency. You hold your ground. You hold your peace. And if your silence makes them uncomfortable, good. That discomfort is not your burden. It's their mirror. It's their conscience waking up. It's their own behavior catching up to them in the echo of your restraint. You are no longer a performer in their drama. You're the presence that makes the whole scene collapse, because what they wanted was your reaction, your fire, your voice, your validation, but what they got was your silence, and that's something they can't control. That's something they can't manipulate. That's something they don't know how to fight, and so they unravel. While you remain still, calm, focused, untouchable, silence is not passive. It is pressure. It is the force that bends the room without raising a hand. It is the presence that fills the space with gravity. It is the line you draw without saying a word, and everyone feels it, especially those who crossed it. And in that space of non-reaction, you begin to see clearly. You begin to notice how much noise you've tolerated, how many unnecessary explanations you've given, how many times you've let someone else's insecurity pull you into chaos, and you stop. You simply stop. You no longer chase closure. You no longer respond to provocation. You no longer explain your peace. You protect it, quietly, powerfully, permanently, because silence is not the absence of communication. It's the presence of self-control. It's the highest form of emotional intelligence. It's the space where reaction ends and power begins. And once you've tasted that kind of stillness, you'll never go back. You'll never beg to be heard. You'll never plead to be understood. You'll simply observe and choose. Choose what you give your energy to. Choose who gets your voice. Choose when to speak and when to let silence say everything. And that's how you rise. That's how you become untouchable. Not by being louder, but by being stiller. Not by reacting, but by revealing, through your silence, who truly holds the power in the room. And this time, it's you. There was a time when you said yes just to avoid discomfort. When you smiled through the disrespect, stayed through the chaos, tolerated the noise just to keep the peace. But what you didn't realize then was that peace that costs you your dignity is not peace. It's a slow betrayal of self. And now you've outgrown that version of you, the version that broke itself into pieces just to fit into places that never deserved your presence. You've learned boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They're doors to protect what's sacred within. They are not punishment. They are preservation. They are not selfish. They are self-respect. Because without boundaries, you become a canvas for other people's chaos. Without boundaries, your energy becomes public property. Your time becomes currency in everyone else's pocket. Your heart becomes a battlefield, and you're the only one bleeding. That ends now. You've decided to armor up, not by hiding, but by honoring. By recognizing that your attention, your presence, your spirit is not free. It's earned. It's chosen. It's protected, and the more you protect it, the more you realize how many people were only around because there were no gates, just open doors and no filters. But now there are thresholds. Now there are standards. Now there's a version of you that watches the energy at the door before it comes in, that listens closely to tone, to intention, to consistency, that doesn't just hear words, but feels frequencies. And when something feels off, you don't explain it away. You don't override your gut to maintain the illusion of harmony. You trust it, because boundaries begin where self-trust begins. And trust in yourself is the first sign you've become untouchable. Not because no one can reach you, but because not everyone should. Boundaries are not about isolation, they're about selection. It's not that you've become unavailable, it's that you've become intentional. You no longer allow access just because someone knows your name, or your past, or your kindness. You've learned that access to you is not a right, it's a privilege. And when someone proves they can't handle the weight of your soul, they don't get to stand close to it anymore. You're no longer in the business of over-explaining your limits. You don't need a reason to say no. You don't need a paragraph to justify your distance. You don't need guilt to remind you of your history with someone. If the connection costs your peace, it's overpriced. If the relationship drains your clarity, it's misaligned. If the energy feels heavy, it's not yours to carry. You've learned that your boundaries are sacred, and anyone who truly values you will honor them, not test them. You used to think setting limits would push people away. Now you understand it only pushes away those who were never meant to stay. It reveals, it filters, it cleanses, and most of all, it strengthens. Every time you reinforce your boundary, you reinforce your worth. Every time you say no to what drains you, you say yes to your power. Every time you protect your space, your mind, your energy, you become more you, more clear, more centered, more grounded in the truth that you no longer need to be accessible to be valuable. Your value does not live in your availability, it lives in your presence, and your presence becomes richer, deeper, stronger when it's guarded, when it's earned, when it's not handed out to every passing hand that doesn't know how to hold it. So now you walk different, not defensive, but deliberate, not guarded, but guided. You don't build walls, you plant boundaries, you grow roots in them. You build a life inside them that honors your nervous system, your peace, your purpose. You no longer negotiate with chaos. You no longer argue with disrespect. You no longer wait to be hurt to realize someone shouldn't be that close. Your energy speaks first, and your boundary listens. And if someone calls you difficult for protecting your peace, let them. If someone says you've changed because you've stopped saying yes to dysfunction, let them talk. That's the price of self-respect. That's the cost of emotional evolution, and you'll pay it gladly because the return is priceless. Peace, clarity, inner power, a heart that beats for itself first, a mind that no longer doubts its own worth, a soul that no longer bends to be understood. That's what boundaries bring you. That's what makes you untouchable. Because now no one gets in unless you open the door. There is a moment in your journey when everything shifts, and it's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's quiet, it's subtle. It's a single realization that echoes like thunder through your entire being. I don't need to be chosen anymore. I don't need validation to feel worthy. I don't need permission to feel powerful. I don't need to be picked, approved, liked, or applauded to know who I am. That is the moment you become a force. That is the moment you become emotionally untouchable. Because nothing and no one can take from you what you no longer seek outside of yourself. You've spent years, maybe decades, waiting to be seen, to be understood, to be accepted, to be chosen, and every time you weren't, it hurt. You questioned your worth. You asked what you were lacking. You bent yourself to be more lovable, more agreeable, more digestible, and still, they didn't choose you, but now you understand. That had nothing to do with your value and everything to do with their vision. Some people cannot see the sun, not because it's not shining, but because their windows are closed. And it's no longer your job to break through their shutters. It's your job to shine regardless. You've stopped trying to fit in. You've stopped shrinking to be tolerated. You've stopped explaining your soul to people committed to misunderstanding it. You've stopped offering pieces of yourself in hopes that someone might find one worth keeping. You've called all your power back home. And in doing so, you've become the chooser. You decide who gets your energy. You decide who stands beside you. You decide what enters your space, what earns your trust, what aligns with your truth. You no longer perform for love. You no longer hustle for belonging. You no longer carry the burden of being everyone's favorite. Because now, you are your own. Your self-worth is no longer in negotiation. You don't need to be invited when you've already built your own table. You don't fear rejection when you know that redirection is protection. You don't chase what walks away, you let it. Because whatever leaves your life while you're being authentic was never meant to stay. And whatever remains or finds you will meet you in your wholeness, not your brokenness. That's the real shift. You've stopped seeing love as something to earn and started seeing it as something to share. You've stopped needing others to believe in you and started believing in yourself with such intensity that the world begins to reflect it back. You've stopped waiting to be chosen, and in doing so, you've chosen you, fiercely, completely, finally. And that choice, that's your armor, that's your anchor. That's the fire in your calm, the steel in your softness, the thunder in your silence. Because when you no longer need to be chosen, you're free. Free to walk away, free to speak your truth, free to feel peace in your solitude, free to build, to grow, to evolve without needing witnesses. You've become the kind of person whose value is not up for discussion, the kind of presence that shifts the energy in a room without making a sound, the kind of soul that doesn't beg, plead, or chase, because it knows exactly what it brings. And if the world doesn't see it, that's okay. The sun still rises without applause. The ocean still moves without validation. And you move in silence, in strength, in truth. You've stopped asking to be chosen, and in doing so, you've become unforgettable, unshakable, untouchable. Not because you built walls, but because you built yourself.